So let's start by welcoming you to this webinar, Giving Tutors What They Need when they need it with ProLiteracy Online Tutor Training. My name's Todd Evans. Hopefully a lot of you know me. I'm the Director of Professional Development for ProLiteracy. Joining us today is Helen, Dolive, and Stephanie Lyas from the Literacy Council of Central Alabama. Helen is the in-house program administrator, and Stephanie is the director of field and ESOL programs. And then we also have Barbara Hathaway from Literacy New Jersey. She's the program services director and master trainer. Now, for those of you who haven't attended our webinars before, we won't have the video of the presenters on. We find that the video eats up a lot of bandwidth, and so for folks that have kind of slower internet speeds, it can cause some problems. So that's why we have this slide, so you can see what people look like, and we'll just hear their presentations and see the slides that they have. To let you know, we are recording. So for those of you attending, in about a week, we will send out a follow-up email. It'll have a link to the webinar recording. We'll include the slide decks for everybody that's presenting. We'll have a little summary sheet that you can share with your colleagues if you want. And then copies of the chat transcript, the Q&A transcript, and those of you who are attending today will also get a certificate in case you need it for any kind of professional development credits or things like that. A little bit about how we're going to interact. So I'm going to ask that you use the chat to introduce yourselves, which you've already done. If there are links that you want to share with the group or you want to ask questions to the group, use the chat to do that. We're going to ask that for presenters, if you have a question for me or Helen or Stephanie or Barbara, that you use the little Q&A icon to type your question into the Q&A feature. What that does is that allows us to kind of keep track of those questions and make sure that everybody's question gets answered. The chat can kind of keep scrolling if a lot of people have questions, and it's very easy to miss one. So this lets us make sure that everybody's question gets answered. Helen, Stephanie, and Barbara have agreed to kind of stay on and answer everybody's question. So at the top of the hour, we will kind of stop taking new questions, but if you've got a question in, they're all going to stay on. I'll make sure that everybody's question gets asked and answered. That'll all be included in the recording, and you're welcome to stay on and listen to the responses. But if you have somewhere else to go, I know a lot of folks have busy days, then know that your question will get answered and that'll be included in the recording. Okay, so I want to take just a little bit of time for folks who aren't familiar with what our basic literacy and ESL training materials are. I'm going to take about 5 minutes and kind of give you kind of a quick overview of what those materials are, and then I'll turn things over to the folks you really came here to hear. So we have 2 comprehensive tutor trainings, one for literacy and one for ESL. We have, within each of those areas, we have face-to-face training materials. Now, those include a PowerPoint slideshow. There are 12 modules for literacy, 13 for ESL. They're modular, so you're free to use all of them, some of them, one of them. They are PowerPoints, which makes them easy for you to download and integrate your own information with our information. They're really designed for you to use and adapt and make your own. So we don't have any problem with you kind of using some of our information, some of your information, and adapting the materials to fit, to have the best fit for your program. So there's that PowerPoint slideshow. There's a PDF of trainer notes. So for each module, each slide has notes that kind of identifies, here are the main points that you want to kind of talk about. Here's an activity to do with the trainees, that sort of thing. There's handout masters for all of the participants in your face-to-face workshop. And if you do all 12 modules, your tutors or teachers really have a nice tutor handbook. It's, I think the handouts altogether are maybe 150 pages or so. Lots of background information, lots of good activities for them to do. And then we do have some instructional videos that model different teaching techniques. So those are the face-to-face materials. Now we also have online materials, which have the same content as the face-to-face materials. So they are interchangeable. If you want to do some of your training in person, some of it online, if you want to use the online stuff for when people miss a session, you can easily do that and be sure that people are getting the same content. So the online courses, there's basically an online slideshow. There's an online screen with a narration. That would be basically what you would say as a trainer. The people taking it online get the same handouts. They have the same videos that you would show in the in-person tutor training. There are exams for the online modules, and that's because when you're doing face-to-face training, as a trainer, you can walk around and kind of see that everybody understands, or maybe you need to kind of clarify something. We don't have that option with the online material, so we have an exam to make sure that folks actually understood what the content for the different modules. And then we give certificates at the end of each module. If somebody needs that certificate, they can take the module, they can take the exam. If they pass the exam, they get a certificate. If you don't need the certificate, you don't have to take the exam, and you can just take the content. So the content is divided up into 4 areas. There's kind of a foundations area for literacy and ESL, which is basically just an introduction about literacy or English language in the US, working with adult learners, an introduction to either literacy or ESL instruction. And this kind of gives you some background information about what you're trying to accomplish, the skills you're trying to develop, and then either a literacy lesson plan or an ESL lesson plan. And this is kind of a generic plan, and it's really the focal point of the tutor training materials. When we surveyed tutors out in the field, what we learned is the thing that would make them feel most comfortable and the thing they worry about the most is, how am I going to organize my time with the students that I'm working with? So that lesson plan kind of serves as that anchor for showing them how to organize their time. We have a section on meeting student needs. So it involves assessment, goal setting, and evaluation. We recognize that a lot of programs have their own assessment processes, so we don't recommend a particular assessment, but we do talk about the different types of assessment, how to set goals with students, and the importance of checking in on those goals, evaluating progress, and setting new goals. There's a series of modules around instruction. So for literacy, that's alphabetics and word study, fluency, vocabulary, reading comprehension, and writing. For ESL, it's vocabulary, conversation, pronunciation, grammar, reading, and writing. And then our last section is kind of putting it into practice. So we talk about language experience, and then we talk about, there's a module for getting started. What am I going to do the first time I meet with that student, my first week, my first month, kind of what are my goals and how do I get started with that student or those students. Now, these training materials, if you are a member of ProLiteracy or you're with an organization that's a member of ProLiteracy, these training materials are free to you. If you're a literacy organization, all of your tutors and teachers can take that online training course for free. There's no limit. They can take it over and over and over again, go back to it. It's a great benefit of membership. And so the only thing that you'll need to do is when you create an account on Education Network is make sure that your organization or your individual member ID is associated with your account, and you'll have immediate access. If you already have an Education Network account, then you can go to the menu in the top right corner. Once you're signed into Education Network, click on My Account and you can add your ID there. And then to access the resources, the tutor training, you can, from the member page, scroll down to Member Central, click on Tutor Training, and all that stuff is right there. If you're not a member of ProLiteracy, then there is a charge for them. The online courses, the online comprehensive tutor training is $50 for one person. And then there are additional bundles that you can purchase. If you're an organization and you want to have access to the face-to-face materials or things like that as well, there are additional bundles and there's information around that. So that's enough of an overview. I'm going to turn things over to Helen, Stephanie, and Barbara. And I think Helen is going to go first. They're going to talk about how they use ProLiteracy's tutor training materials, especially the online materials, in their programs. Talk to you about, kind of give you some ideas of some different models they've used and how they found them to be effective. And then we're going to come back and we're going to have some questions and opportunities to ask questions. I do see that there's already a question about how to access the tutor training materials. So Patrick, I'm going to save that to the very end and do that during the Q&A. All right, so Helen, I am going to stop sharing my screen and let you start sharing yours.
Thank you, Todd. Just give me one moment. Hello, everyone. I'm excited to be talking to you today. I wanted to give a brief introduction to our agency, the Literacy Council of Central Alabama. Both Stephanie and I are staff members there. It's an organization that was founded in 1991 as a collaboration between United Way of Central Alabama, Birmingham Chamber of Commerce, and the Junior League of Birmingham. And in about 2012, from my side of the program, the Adult Basic Literacy, we began direct services ourselves. So we're currently serving 5 counties in Central Alabama. And as many of you do, we provide literacy education through a variety of different formats, be it one-on-one tutoring, small groups, classes, and other programming. In the areas of adult basic literacy, English to speaks of other languages, family literacy, and workforce development. And so I'll be speaking today specifically about a program that I manage within the adult basic literacy and give you a little mechanics about how we were originally set up, how the pandemic changed that, and how it necessitated a change in the way that we were training our tutors. I also wanted to let you know, as many of you do too, we are strong advocates for literacy efforts within our community, and we have a lot of partnerships with different organizations. So that kind of gives you a little taster of who we are. We've been in existence 30 years. I'm very excited about that. But we are a fairly small organization, staff of around 15, and we work mainly with volunteers for our programming. So the program that I specifically work with was originally structured. We take volunteers from the community, train them to be tutors. They don't have to have any kind of background in teaching or tutoring, although it may be helpful if they do, but we provided them with a one-shot Saturday workshop, 7 to 8 hours in person. And then the tutors would do some observations with us, and then we operated a drop-in. And so at certain times and on certain days, Groups of tutors would come to our downtown office in Birmingham, and groups of learners. And I would kind of match people up so that they could work together on the day. And our focus is mainly on reading, although that did sometimes go a little into writing and maybe math as well. It was a very individualized program so that tutors really talked with the learners about what their goals were, and they worked together to develop lessons themselves. So what materials they used, we had a library, a physical library, and the materials they could use was entirely up to them. And then everything kind of came screeching to a halt during the pandemic, as I'm sure it did for many of you. And it was obvious that that traditional model was not going to work. And additionally, our traditional model of in-person trainings was not going to work. And so I started to think about how we could adapt our tutor training, but still make sure that we were giving our tutors the information they needed, and that it would be in a way where they could reference that material again, etc. And just to preface, both Stephanie and I were very keenly watching ProLiteracy develop their 2 online tutor trainings. And kind of in the backs of our mind, we were thinking along the way, this would be, you know, some hybrid of this would be very helpful in the future. But the pandemic really accelerated our decision to restructure our programs and obviously necessitated it. So the first step for us was simply figuring out how we were going to provide services in the drop-in, which traditionally, you know, had been in person. So we quickly adapted and learned a lot about Zoom and came up with the model that we are still using for a certain extent and probably will continue to use even if we do resume some in-person services on the adult basic literacy side. So we have a dedicated Zoom link that I monitor, and on specific days and times, tutors and learners enter that Zoom link, and then I place them in breakout rooms. They work together just as they would have done in person. We have a variety of materials that we suggest that they use. Some of them are scanned, some of them are online, specifically designed for adult learners, such as News for You Online. And some of them are online resources, but they're not necessarily designed for adult learners. So it requires some adaptation on the part of the tutor. So that was where we kind of were. And we'd obviously developed a method of providing our services to our learners from the comfort of people's homes, although a lot of our learners are maybe only have a smartphone, so they were using a smartphone. So then the next step was, how do we train the tutors so that we are comfortable that they have the information they need to be helpful in their tutoring with their learners? How do we make sure that everyone's getting the same theoretical background? And how do we make this tutoring training not an incredibly involved and long process? Because we didn't want to put off people who wanted to volunteer, but in the past, you know, our one and done approach was popular with tutors, but it obviously didn't always provide them, you know, it was too much to take in on a particular day. So I started to think about what we would do. I steered away from kind of dumbing down, and I wanted it to be a clear and comprehensive training with different pieces. And so this is what I came up with. It's nothing particularly amazing, but I wanted to make sure that we covered everything we needed to do, and it allowed for some adaptability. So our new training is structured. It begins with a series of emails that I send out. And I know there's a lot of information on this page, but I'll just kind of touch briefly on it. So we sort of start with it, when someone has interest in the program, they get a link with a Google document that helps with the data collection. Then the next part of the process, they get an email with a payment link. And then they will, once they've paid, they get an email with a little intro to literacy video that I created of myself talking through a few things to think about with literacy. And then in that same email, they get the instructions on creating their education network accounts. So they're going to be able to access the basic literacy online training for the specific theory modules. I did have people ask me, why are you sending so many emails? You know, wouldn't it be better to put everything in one email? And I felt that it actually worked better to break it into chunks, because I have discovered, as many of you have, people don't always read long emails with a lot of information. And I found that it was better to do it in little pieces. Plus, in the past, we would run into the problem that people would sign up for our trainings, and despite the fact that we had told them about the time commitments, it would come to the day of the training, they train and then say, oh, I can't tutor now. This doesn't fit with my schedule. So I give them plenty of opportunities throughout the process to understand what kind of commitment we're requiring from them. So I chose to only have our trainee tutors complete 4 of the instruction modules from the ProLiteracy Online Training. And as you see there, it's modules 6 through 9. It is the traditional core theory that I feel it's helpful to know for the reading, to assist people with reading. And I went back and forth on this a lot, but I came up with the important part for me was that they needed to complete these 4 theory modules. And then what I ask people to do, they go and they can do that in their own time. And then when they have completed the modules, I ask them to take the exam at the end of each of them and to email me the certificates. So I know that they have at least passed those exams and that everyone's on a level playing field for the next step in the training. And then the final step was a Zoom meeting, because currently in my side of the program, we are doing all our tutoring virtually. So it made sense to have a Zoom meeting. And that meeting's going to be scheduled with the appropriate trainer. So for adult basic literacy, that's myself. I have a colleague who works with workforce development. And for her, she wished them to go through the same process, but she would conduct the Zoom meeting. I send out an email that has materials to read in advance, and it has the Zoom link for the meeting. And you can see that's some of the topics that we include. So I wanted to make it very specific to our program, very specific to the basic information tutors would need to do tutoring via Zoom. And then I follow it up with asking them to complete an evaluation of the training. We have a tutor agreement, we have them complete, and then any additional materials or handouts. So I wanted to just briefly go through why I chose this particular model. And as you'll see when Stephanie speaks, she's within the same organization, but she chose a different model that suited her program. And so a few things for me were, one, that it encourages digital literacy skills. And that's very important. Even if we do go back to in-person tutoring, we are very aware that we are needing to work to help our learners improve their digital literacy skills. And so we also need our tutors to be familiar with digital literacy skills. And the chance to access those online modules and also to participate with Zoom and things like that, it's a real bonus to have our tutors going through and understanding what it's like to learn some of these things as they'll be assisting learners. I found that the model was much more cost effective and a better use of time. I was no longer creating massive binders with lots of photocopying, and it also didn't require them to pay me for additional hours to conduct workshops on a Saturday. We were able to get that fitted in at different times. I really like the fact that the modules allow tutors to learn at their own pace. You know, one of the huge things that we talk about is how adults learn, and we weren't really necessarily addressing that with a one and done method. The modules for the theory are wonderful. They encourage you to learn in different ways. Several people have said that they require some interaction. You know, you have to be watching, you have to be listening, you're reading, you have exercises to do. And so it is not just reading a bunch of information or hearing someone tell you it. So that people are learning at their own pace. And then I loved how the materials were easy for them to refer back to. So if a question came up later when they started tutoring, they have that Education Network account. They can go in, they can go back, they could retake a test, they could read up on it. And they also have the ability to print out handouts as and when they want them. So we're not producing masses of paper, but they can print materials if they find it easier there. And I do think it provides better retention of materials. And then we have options for further study. So I chose 4 theory modules out of that 14-hour training. The modules I chose take about 4 to 6 hours. But obviously, there's additional great information, as Todd had mentioned. And so the chance for them to go back, if they are particularly interested and diligent and want more information, it's easy for them to access that. And then just a few added benefits that I feel from the model I came up with. It involves online data collection. So there's a lot less paper going on in my process of working with the volunteers. I'm able to save documents like certificates to our data management database. You know, we've got good records that are coming through the Google Doc. It's easy to get statistics, easy to organize that. One of the things that I am excited about going forward with the training is that it could be easily adapted for returning to in-person tutoring, because you'd simply want to take that session and make that an in-person session. But the beginning part of it could stay online and gives the tutors much more flexibility. And then I do see other benefits of it can be adapted for different scenarios. So we have people who are conducting programs in different counties, and for them, they could take that Zoom session and make it specific to their county and specific to the resources that they have available. Additionally, if we wanted to add in another piece, so if I had tutors who were going to be working exclusively on writing, I might encourage them to go back and to take that writing module. And then finally, I just really want to say how excited we were that ProLiteracy just produces these wonderful materials, and the chance to have our tutors create these Education Network accounts, but they are linked to our organization. So I can go in and see who has been working on modules. I can ask Todd to remove a tutor's access if they are no longer with our program. And I see a really great potential for professional development, where I know that all the tutors have these accounts. So we could maybe do some workshops on other materials that are available, some of the different courses and webinars, and also written material that is collected within ProLiteracy's Education Network. So I'm going to stop right here, and I am going to pass it to Stephanie. I hope I haven't talked too long. And Todd, were there any questions before I pass it to Stephanie?
There were a few questions, but I think we'll save them till the end, except for one. Just to clarify, you mentioned that you send a PayPal link to your tutors. What exactly are they paying for? Do you charge people to come to your tutor training?
We
I know
do.
some. Okay.
Yeah, we do.
That's what I thought. Some programs do that, so that's what I thought. Okay, we'll save the other questions for the end.
Great. Thank you, everyone.
Stephanie, you want to share your screen? Perfect.
Yes, thank you so much. So as Helen mentioned, the pandemic changed a lot about the way we deliver programs, the way we deliver training. But I want to give you just a little context about the ESOL programs because our delivery method is quite different from that of the adult basic literacy programs. So our programs take place in the community where students live, work, and play. We are in schools, churches, libraries, community centers, and just about any public place where students might gather. And that has been a very effective way for us to teach English. Our learners come from over 70 different countries around the world, and our classes are taught by volunteers who are trained and supported by us. Currently, our classes are offered online, via Zoom, and in person. Now, traditionally, all of our programs were in-person classes throughout the community. But of course, the pandemic created an opportunity for us to expand our global classroom and offer classes online via Zoom. So we've only been doing that for about a couple of years. And we offer 3 main level groups within that: beginner, intermediate, and advanced. But we are creating kind of subgroups within those. So I would like to talk a little bit about our tutor training model, which is a hybrid of the face-to-face workshop and the online modules offered by ProLiteracy. And what we found was that the face-to-face workshop, as Helen mentioned, was very long. It provided for a very long day for both the trainees and the trainers. So we decided to maybe experiment a little bit with the face-to-face and the hybrid, because what I found as a trainer is that there are so many elements of the face-to-face workshop that were valuable that could not easily be converted to a Zoom session online, that we decided to experiment. So we've only been doing this since August of 2021, so it is very experimental, but so far we found that this method works best for us on the ESOL side. So the first step is that trainees come in and they attend the face-to-face workshop on a Saturday. So usually it's from maybe 9 until 1 p.m. And in the face-to-face workshop, we do incorporate elements of the 13 modules outlined by ProLiteracy, but we also add in activities that students will be doing in the classroom. So for example, we do a lot of total physical response activities. We do a lot of hands-on activities, games, and that kind of thing. So the tutors, the trainees get to practice a lot of the techniques that we incorporate into our teaching methods. And they found that very, very useful because our programs, again, are out in the community and they'll be teaching face-to-face for the most part. So this is a good practice for them. The second step, so after they complete the face-to-face workshop, the second step is to complete a minimum of 5 online modules. And like Helen, I selected the 5 that I thought were most beneficial to the trainees. Obviously, all 13 are. But these are the ones that I wanted them to concentrate on the most. So they talk about vocabulary, conversation, grammar, reading, and writing. And once they complete the modules online, then they will send me a PDF of their certificates that they completed. And I will in turn send them a certificate of completion. So that lets them know that the entire tutor training is complete at this point, and now they are ready to be placed within a program. So those are the first 3 steps of the hybrid tutor training model. Then the last 2 elements of the model are are optional, but they're very important because the trainees often have questions about, okay, now we know the why. What about the how? How do we do this? How do we implement what we have learned? So I offer trainer support and or observation up to 6 hours after they have completed the entire tutor training. And that entails my going out to a program and just providing support to them. I don't like to really call it observation because observation makes people nervous and they really, kind of are not as relaxed as they would be and comfortable as they would be had I not been there to observe them. So I just particularly say, I'm going to come out and support you. And if you have any questions, if you want feedback on how the sessions went, then that's what I'm there for. And the trainees really, really appreciate that support. The professional development part is fairly new for us. And we actually just started this portion of it in January of this year. And the professional development is more of a deep dive into the training module. So what it is a quarterly sharing session for all of the tutors. So not just the ones who went through a particular training, but all tutors are invited to participate. And it's delivered via Zoom. And what we do is we treat this as a professional learning community. So if you're familiar with K through 12 education, teachers engage in professional learning communities with their peers to help kind of support one another and come up with ideas about how to improve their teaching practice. So that's what I like to use these for. And we had one back in January that was very successful. The tutors got together and they talked about what worked well, what didn't work well. They had questions for one another. We shared PowerPoints. We shared samples of students' work and all of these things. So it was a very, very useful time for us to spend together to provide this professional development opportunity. So I'm going to talk just briefly about the benefits of the face-to-face model and then the online modules for tutor training. And then I'm going to talk about why I think it's a good idea to combine elements of both. So for me, the top 3 benefits of the face-to-face training model is that it allows trainers and trainees to interact more personally. We do come together on a Saturday, maybe from 9 until 1, and we do all of the things that we would probably do in a class. So for example, I like to model how a successful class, in my opinion, would go. So we have the coffee and we have the snacks available for trainers, and it's a relaxed atmosphere, but we're actually getting an opportunity to see one another. And after the pandemic, I think the first training that I did that was face-to-face was very, very interesting because people were so excited just to be together again in one space. Now, we were socially distanced and we did have on our mask and all of these things. We took all of the precautions, but it was just good to be in the same space because many of the tutors would be advancing to a face-to-face class. So we wanted to kind of give them an idea of what that might look like. Also, the face-to-face sessions allow trainees to explore a variety of materials and resources. So we still use the Teaching Adults Manual by New Readers Press. We refer often to that throughout the training, but also just coming in a face-to-face session allows trainees to get a hand on the materials that they might be using. For example, if we're using a particular commercial curriculum, or we're using something like News for You by New Readers Press, then they get a chance to actually put their hands on it before they're sent out to a program to actually use the material. So they find that very useful. And finally, it allows trainees to practice techniques that must be performed in person. I mentioned that we do a lot of games. We model a lot of activities that allow students to interact in class, and those just cannot be done online via a Zoom session. For example, if we're doing a game like People Bingo or Blobs and Lines or some type of game where students have to interact with each other in person, then this allows trainees to kind of practice those things. So that's what we primarily use the face-to-face training model for. And also I incorporate a section about cultural literacy, implicit bias, culturally responsive teaching, and that kind of thing, just to kind of tie everything together. So the benefits of incorporating the ProLiteracy online modules are kind of self-explanatory, and I won't dive too deeply off into this because Helen kind of touched on some of these points. But the benefit is that it allows for a deep dive study of key concepts. So for example, if a tutor is having trouble with maybe forming lessons around vocabulary, they can go into the training module and get that instruction, take the exam, and kind of dive deeper into that concept without having to ask me or something else. So it's very good for that. Also, it allows trainees to learn at their own pace and convenience. Many times people have very busy lives, and a lot of my trainees mentioned that they completed the modules after 10 o'clock when the kids were in bed and the house was quiet. So it allowed them to do it at their own pace. Also, it allows trainees to review pertinent material. It allows trainees to also spend time on content that is most relevant to their experience. So for example, there's one group that is a strictly conversation group. And so they can maybe eliminate some of the trainings or the modules on reading, writing, or some of the other instructional modules. They can focus on the ones that are relevant to their experience. Okay, so here is the benefits, or here are the benefits of the hybrid training model. And this is kind of, again, a marriage between the face-to-face model and the online ProLiteracy modules. And this is what I came up with. It allows for in-person interaction. So again, most of our students really welcome the idea to come together in a physical space to learn with other people, and also the tutors as well. I found that when we transitioned to Zoom, we kind of lost a lot of people who were not very comfortable with the technology, who did not want to interact with students online. They wanted face-to-face. So this kind of gave us an opportunity to provide not only the training, but also a model for them to instruct. Also, it's personalized. You can customize it, as Todd mentioned before. You can use some of the modules or you can use all of them. It's really up to you. What is best for your program? It combines blended learning materials and resources. So we incorporate classroom training techniques as well as e-learning techniques. In the event that we are teaching in person and something happens and we have to go back to e-learning, it prepares trainees to be comfortable with that model, to do either or. We provide remote teaching tools. So for example, one of our professional development workshops might incorporate using Zoom. How do we use breakout rooms? How do we create materials online or use PDF materials online to teach? So we explore a lot of those things. I already talked about the flexible schedule. It's wonderful for people who may not want to be in a workshop all day long on a Saturday. They can pick and choose the modules that work best for them after they have completed the ones that are required by us. And also we incorporate in-person teaching resources that I mentioned, maybe a commercial curriculum or something like that. So for me, these are the benefits of doing both. And again, you kind of have to do what works best for you, which leads me to my final slide, is advice from the trenches. Because when we first started doing this, nobody knew what to do. We were all kind of scrambling for ideas. How are we going to train online? How are we going to teach students online? And my advice for you is to do what works best for your program. So for example, this may not be a good fit for you to do the face-to-face or the online. Do what works best for you, but be willing to try, be willing to explore other alternatives to what you're doing. Be flexible and patient, very important. Also ask for feedback from trainees and or peers. So I like to also ask for feedback from the trainees after a session. How did you like this? What worked? What didn't work? And they're usually pretty honest about whether they liked it or not, or what could have been left out. So this is a way for me as the trainer to kind of tweak things and make it just right for the tutors and the learners that we serve. Also ask for feedback from peers. So other people who are doing this or experimenting with this, certainly reach out for feedback for that. And finally, allow tutors the opportunity to observe and practice what they have learned. And I think that is probably the most important part of all of this, because we want our tutors to feel comfortable teaching and interacting with students. So if nothing else, I will stop sharing and I will turn it over to Barbara. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Stephanie. And we do have some questions, but I think we're going to save them till the end because I think they're going to be applicable to some of the stuff that Barbara talks about as well. So Barbara, if you want to just go ahead.
Okay, great. Thank you, Todd. So similar to what you've heard before, Literacy New Jersey is a nonprofit that provides small group and one-to-one instruction to adults in basic literacy, ESL, but we also help adults who have dropped out of high school and want to come back and earn a high school diploma. And we help students who are preparing for the citizenship test. Literacy New Jersey is a statewide organization that manages programs in 12 counties, and we maintain an affiliation with all the other literacy programs in the state. We provide our services by training and supporting volunteer tutors. Pre-pandemic, that was primarily in-person classes at local libraries. And we also offer support across the state in the form of professional development and tutor training workshops. So of course, the way we provide those services changed when the pandemic hit, and we knew that we had to develop an online training, and quickly. So for those of you who've had to make this transition, you know it isn't easy, but having access to ProLiteracy's extensive, well-designed training material really helped facilitate the process. We found that the ProLiteracy material was a great complement to Literacy New Jersey's existing training, and by combining elements of both, we were able to create a new online training that suited our needs. So a major benefit of transitioning to online training is that now we can offer training across the state in a way that is flexible and cost-effective. So instead of planning one training for 5 people in this county, one training for 6 people in another, now we plan statewide trainings where we can train 20, 25, 30 people at a time, as you can see here. And instead of worrying about booking a venue and filling out paperwork, and then maybe you get there and there isn't a room set up, now we have the flexibility to schedule the training when we need it, and people can conveniently join from the comfort of their home. Another interesting benefit that we found from the online training is that now we are attracting a younger and more tech-savvy demographic of tutors who are better prepared or better equipped to help our students become more digitally literate. So as we transitioned to online training, we began to realize just how useful the ProLiteracy training material could be. So first of all, the curriculum is very extensive. It covers a wide variety of topics. Our tutor training is 5 sessions. So we cover a lot of material. Second, besides incorporating ProLiteracy material into our training, We also use specific modules to supplement our training. So after each training session, we assign 1 or 2 related modules for homework. And these modules offer a nice review of what we discussed during our session, but also provide additional material that we weren't able to cover in our 2-hour session. The population we serve is primarily ESL, and those are the focus, the modules we tend to focus on. But there is flexibility if we need some basic literacy tutors, then we have some of the trainees follow ProLiteracy's basic literacy curriculum. And that way we can include a variety of tutors in one training instead of using separate trainings. Another nice thing about the ProLiteracy modules is if a trainee misses a session, you can have them complete 1 or 2 modules as a makeup, and then they're ready to rejoin your next session. It's also a great review tool for tutors who maybe haven't been through training in a while and they need a little refresher. Or sometimes you have tutors that say, oh, I'm just out of ideas for what to include in my lesson. And then you can say, well, why don't you go look at module 4 of ProLiteracy's training, you know, to get some lesson planning ideas, or maybe module 12 to look at the language experience approach again. But what I really love about the ProLiteracy training is the ESL lesson wheel. So as part of our online training, we have a final assignment, and that is for participants to create an ESL lesson plan, which they have to present to the group online. And what we found is that asking trainees to plan their lesson using the ProLiteracy lesson wheel has produced much better lesson plans than using any other method that we had before. I think it's because it's a very clear, straightforward process to follow. As you can see, the lesson is designed around a specific topic. And then using this great visual, the trainees can easily structure their lesson to include activities and materials that relate to each of the 8 components. For the final assignment, each trainee has to create a lesson plan slideshow that includes a minimum of 8 slides, 1 for each component. And really, the results have been amazing. Not only are the lesson plans more creative visually and content-wise, but in the process, the trainees are learning how to create a plan that provides the repetition and the practice that students really need to master the material. So I highly recommend, if you haven't, that you check out the ESL lesson wheel in Module 4. And then just one last thing I want to highlight about the ProLiteracy online material is the opportunities that are provided for participation during training, which is especially important when you're using an online training format. So here's just one example related to the second component of the lesson plan, of the lesson wheel, vocabulary. So using this picture, you'll ask your participants to suggest vocabulary words that they might think important for students to know. You're going to ask your participants to either respond orally or put suggestions in the chat box. But it starts a conversation with your participants. And this type of participation is very helpful during training because it really lets you know how well your trainees are understanding the material you're presenting. So those are just a couple of examples of how we've found the ProLiteracy training material to be incredibly instructive. So if you haven't used it yet, we really recommend you check it out. Okay, turn it back over to you, Todd.
All right, thank you, Barbara and Stephanie and Helen. And I know that we are maybe about 4 minutes away from the top of the hour. Some of you may need to go. So I'm really going to encourage everyone to get their questions into the Q&A. As I said before, Barbara and Stephanie and Helen have agreed to kind of stick around after the top of the hour to make sure everybody's question gets answered. So those will be included on the recording, and you're free to stay on and listen to their responses. If you have to get off for some reason, those responses will be included in the recording. You will get a certificate, a follow-up email with all of the slideshows and the recording and their certificate. So I want to kind of touch on a couple of things that Helen, Stephanie, and Barbara highlighted. Some of you have seen this diagram before. We have been kind of emailing you, trying to engage you around rethinking or thinking differently about how you provide training and support to your tutors in your organization. So this was one of the pieces that we sent out. And I want to highlight kind of that online courses piece along with the interaction piece. And you heard kind of Helen, Stephanie, and Barbara talk about different models where they had their tutors as part of their pre-service training, taking a module and then coming in person or into a Zoom session and discussing the content that they learned in that tutor training module, and then maybe applying it by creating a lesson plan, or maybe they're doing a simulation in person and practicing teaching each other, or some of those things. That is actually a great model for providing ongoing support to your tutors as well. So I know most of programs have tutors fill out a monthly report to let them know kind of how many hours they've met with their students and what they're working on, that sort of thing. Those monthly reports are a great way to ask even more specific questions. You can design your questions around the lesson plan and the things that the tutor should be doing in a lesson. So kind of going off of Barbara's lesson planning wheel, how are you working on vocabulary? How are you working on conversations? How are you working on pronunciation? So you can ask those specific questions to kind of remind tutors what type of things they should be working on. And then within those responses, you can look for kind of common themes that where tutors are having trouble. Then perhaps you gather a group of 5 or 10 tutors that are having trouble around teaching conversations, let's say teaching conversations to low-level ESL learners. Well, then we can assign a module or part of a module or an online course or a YouTube video that maybe addresses some of that, have them watch that, and then have just a little kind of tutor roundtable just with that group, kind of discussing those issues, discussing what they learned in the module, in the YouTube video. Encourage people to go out and try some of the strategies they learned about and discussed, come back in a month and talk about how they went, adaptations they made, that sort of thing. So this kind of thinking about using these online tools, the online training modules in our tutor training, our other online courses, and just a variety of resources that are out there to kind of do some of this ongoing targeted training and support, I think can is a really nice opportunity to think differently about how you provide support to tutors and not just kind of trying to host these big in-service trainings. All right, so I did want to before we get into questions, I just wanted to remind folks, we do have a conference coming up in San Antonio, October 3rd through 5th, live conference. So if you don't know anything about that, haven't heard that, or interested in attending, you can go and find out more about it at proliteracy.org/conference. And now let's get to the questions. So our first question is from, and again, for those of you who have to go, thank you. We understand. For those of you who want to stay on and listen to the responses to the questions, you're welcome to do so. So the first question was from Patrick about how do we access the tutor training? So Patrick, I'm going to show you that real quick. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to, you can see that I am signed into Education Network. So if I've entered in my member ID, and if I haven't entered in my member ID, I can click here and go to my account, and I can enter my individual member ID or my organization's member number right here and click save. And then it'll process. It may take about a day to process, and then it'll move you over and you'll have availability. But I can just scroll down, and right here in this Member Central area, I can click on Tutor Training. And here are all of those resources: the face-to-face materials, the online workshop for basic literacy and ESL. And I can just click on those and access those. Any of my tutors that create an account, as long as they enter that membership ID number, they'll have access to these same things. So that's how you access them. If you're not a member, you'll have a little bit different screen there that will give you opportunities to purchase different bundles. So you can purchase the online workshop for $50, the face-to-face materials for $175, or the everything bundle for $250. And that includes the face-to-face materials and 50 online licenses that you can give out to your tutors. Okay, so next question, also from Patrick, and I think this is directed to, I'm going to move this back over here. I think this is directed to Stephanie and Helen. The question is, would you mind sharing your Google Doc tutor intake form? And Barbara, I don't know if your organization uses an online form for people to sign up for to become a tutor as well, or but if you do, if you wouldn't mind sharing that form as well.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Okay, and so if you guys are willing, I will reach out to Helen, Stephanie, and Barbara, and Patrick will make sure that we kind of include those in the resource page that we send out with the email. So there'll be some links to those forms there. Okay, let's see, next question. Can you describe the purpose of the drop-in session? So I think this is probably for Stephanie and Helen. Is this where you match tutors and students? What are you observing how they teach? So can you talk a little bit more about what happens during those drop-in sessions?
Hi, Todd. I will respond because I think I was the one that was talking about drop-in. So drop-in was originally how our program was structured on the adult basic literacy side for tutoring. And I, as the program manager, we would allow groups of learners and groups of tutors to come, and then I would match them up on the day. And this allowed us to be very flexible. Sometimes people were not very good about letting us know when they were able to attend sessions or not attend sessions. And so we tried to be incredibly flexible with that model. And I got very familiar with the tutors and learners, figuring out who would work well together. And it's quite a different model from the one-on-one tutoring that a lot of places do. And so our challenge really was how to transition from that drop-in to an online format. Obviously, with Zoom and things, you can't quite drop in the same way. So that was not actually to do with training. That was the program structure that we had prior to the pandemic for my specific program.
Okay, thank you, Helen. And Stephanie, you had maybe not a drop-in session, but you had kind of an observation session as well. if I remember correctly?
Yes, so the observation session is primarily for me as a trainer to go in and support the tutors once they've been placed in a program. So basically what I do is if it's an in-person program, I commit to going out to maybe the first 3. And particularly if the tutor is brand new, they need a lot of support at first and they welcome a lot of support. So I make plans to go out to the first 3 classes and just pretty much observe. But again, I don't like to use the term observation because it kind of puts people on edge a little bit. So what I tell them is I'm coming out to your program to support you. And they like that approach a lot better. And that's actually what I do. So I just kind of sit back and I do offer feedback as needed. Sometimes in the middle of a lesson, a tutor might say, how do I teach this or what should I say? And so I might jump in, but for the most part, I'm just observing how the tutors do, and I offer feedback at the end on what went well, what could be a little bit better. And they really do appreciate this. Actually, they ask for this. So I try to accommodate them in that way. So that's what the observation is all about. And if they're teaching on Zoom online, then I might do the same thing. I might just drop in and just observe. I'm in the background. And if they need my support, I'm there for them. So I'm a very hands-on trainer, and that's one of the reasons why I thought it was very important. You know, being a volunteer myself many years ago, I really appreciated that kind of support. So that's what the observation is all about.
Thanks, Stephanie. And Barbara, I know you said you had your prospective tutors actually create a lesson plan and present that. So that's kind of an observation, but do the local programs, after you've trained those volunteers, do they do any observation pieces, or do you do any more, have any more opportunities to observe and provide feedback or support?
Mm-hmm. Yes. So actually, during our training, when we were doing in-person training, one of the sessions was a classroom observation, and we would take the trainees to, it was a high school where we had 5 or 6 classes running at the same time. And we'd have the trainees sit in a little bit in each of the classes to kind of see how things worked and different styles that people had. But we also offer support once tutors go through the training. They can first be like an assistant, so they could come in and help somebody else for a few weeks to see how things go. We sometimes do stop in just to see how things are going. We offer like a mentorship. Sometimes we have people, when we have enough tutors, we sometimes have team teaching or co-teaching, so that 2 tutors work together. And that seems to be nice too, because they kind of support one another, and then they can talk, you know, between the 2 of them and talk about what they need to do better or what they want to change about what they're doing.
Excellent. Excellent. So we have another question that I think is going to be applicable to all 3 of you. So I'll start with Barbara, and then we'll go to Stephanie and Helen. Do you have any prospective tutors that don't want to do the virtual components? So either the online modules or the Zoom aspect, or who are tech averse, and how do you work through that?
So we try to encourage everybody to give it a try at first. The fact that people are attending an online training, we say, hey, you're doing this, you know, you can do this with students as well. Most people seem to do okay with the ProLiteracy online modules. When it comes to creating a lesson plan, you know, I would say like out of 25 people, we might get 1 person who says, you know, I really don't know how to do this. And then we say, okay, then you put together your lesson plan that you would present to somebody in person. But we definitely try to encourage people to try, the tech route first.
Excellent. Stephanie, Helen, anything to add to that?
I would agree with Barbara. I just try to encourage the tutors to at least try. You never know, because we might have to shift back to online learning again. If you're teaching in an in-person class and something happens and we have to go back online, you kind of need to be prepared. So I try to stretch them a little bit. And so far, I haven't had any resistance to the online modules. In fact, the feedback that I've received so far is that the modules were extremely helpful, that it allowed them to go a little bit deeper into a topic. Whereas with the face-to-face session, we have very limited time and access. So I think the online modules have been a very welcomed component of this training on our end.
Okay. Helen?
Yeah, so this was something that we really debated, my supervisor and I, about kind of how to handle, but currently we are not back to in-person tutoring for a variety of reasons. And so our program exists in a virtual environment. So if a tutor is unwilling to go through the online training, as it stands, they're not able to tutor for us right now. And one of the reasons, I think we will be back in some format for in-person, but the pandemic really did, as Stephanie said, really highlight for us the value of digital literacy for both our learners and our tutors. Because a lot of questions, even pre-pandemic, that were coming to our tutors connected with reading were really digital literacy areas. And we knew this was part of our program that we need to kind of bump up. And obviously the pandemic kind of threw that into, sharper focus for us. And so I think we really see it as an opportunity. There's a lot of hand-holding and encouragement if folks are reluctant, but I've had very positive reviews from the folks who are doing this tutoring. They get in that breakout room together, they can share their screens, they can discuss, they can show videos, they have the wealth of the internet at their fingertips. And I'm not sure that those who are currently doing virtual tutoring will return in person, because they like the freedom that they have. They like the fact that, they can be at home. There may be kids, but they don't have to drive and find a parking space downtown, variety of different reasons. And so when we kind of put that to tutors, they understand that. So I think right now they're somewhat self-selecting, but I have had some who were really resistant, and through persuasion and often just showing them how easy a Zoom session can be, and knowing that I'm there in the lobby managing the experience. I'm available at the touch of a button. I feel like a genie sometimes, because I pop into a breakout room and try to deal with a tech issue or a question and then pop back out again. But they really do find it a good experience often. So it's like both of them have said, you just sort of kind of working through it.
Mm-hmm. And I know this is kind of a follow-up. So I know, Helen, you were talking about kind of initiating the tutoring process with sending out an email with instructions about how to sign on and how to create an Education Network account and find the courses. Barbara, I think you kind of talked about the same thing. Have you found yourselves having to provide a lot of tech support to tutors, or have you found that it's kind of minimal once you create the kind of instruction sheets for how to access things, or is that good for most people?
I found that, so we put the instructions for accessing the ProLiteracy modules in with our PowerPoint of our first session, and then we give the PowerPoint to the participants. And what I found is, as long as people follow the directions on the slides, they don't have any problem.
Okay.
I would second that, Barb. Yes. So one of the first things I did, which was helpful and has helped, is I went through the process myself before I wrote those emails. So I kind of had mapped the path myself, so I could see if there were areas when people might have a confusion of which particular blue button to press or whatever. I'm surprised by how few issues I have had and how few questions I've gotten about that process. I will say that I did even go to the extent of asking family members to go through the process to see if it was clear to people who had no experience. And so I kind of did a little field testing, and I think so far those instructions seem to be holding up okay.
Excellent. And I think that's kind of some of the things that we're hearing from the field in general regarding technology in general, is just the value in providing clear step-by-step instructions, which kind of Helen and Barbara, you guys talked about. It helps to go through them yourself and kind of write down each step that you do. Providing screenshots can help a lot. And then I think, you know, from what we hear from just people in general, that takes care of 80 to 90% of the issues. And then just be willing to kind of put in a little extra time with folks who really need, you know, kind of that personal guidance. And that seems to address most of the issues that people have. We did have a comment from Patrick that he is impressed that you guys have ESOL students from 90 countries. Says that's amazing. We have a question from Leo about offering the training to a cohort of tutors, kind of 10 so. So I can offer answer some of the technical information. Is, will I have access to these online and face-to-face modules with others? Yes. So Leo, as a member, you have access to all of those materials for free, the face-to-face materials and the online materials. If your tutors in your organization, as long as your 10 tutors put in your organization ID when they create an account, they will all have free access to the face-to-face materials if they want them, certainly the online materials. And so kind of taking people through the training as a cohort really just consists of you setting out a schedule for those 10 people and saying, okay, this week we're going to take module 6, and then on next Monday we're going to meet on Zoom and discuss module 6, and then, you know, kind of setting the schedule for the next. So the modules themselves are unfacilitated, they're self-paced, asynchronous, so people can kind of take them whenever they want. So if you want to lead people through a cohort, you kind of have to provide that cohort structure. But in terms of being able to provide it to multiple people and have them access it at the same time, they can absolutely do it. Do you guys, it sounds like Helen, Stephanie, and Barbara, you guys are kind of taking all of your trainees through, it seems like as a cohort, but I wasn't clear. Some of you might have some flexibility in terms of people coming in and out and not necessarily following a specific schedule. Do you want to kind of speak to that cohort model at all?
I'll speak briefly just from my program. I had envisaged it that I could work with cohorts for that Zoom session. It's actually panned out that I'm more doing individual sessions just because we are continuously training and taking in tutors. And so we're not on a set schedule. And but the Zoom session allows me to, I have some steps in it that can make it a little more interactive if I have a group. So I'm kind of thinking hopefully at some point I'll be able to have, you know, maybe 4 or 5 people in that particular kind of session.
Okay. Barbara, Stephanie, anything to add?
I would just say that we do have cohorts because the way our classes are structured, we teach primarily in terms. So we have a fall term and a spring term of classes, and the trainings are usually held in between. So during the late summer months into early fall. And many of the tutors who train together actually end up tutoring either in the same program or a close by program. So they do kind of follow the same training schedule. However, with the pandemic, obviously there were some people who could not attend the face-to-face session, or they couldn't follow the same schedule as everyone else. So the flexibility of the online modules really, really helped us a lot in that area, that, if they didn't attend the face-to-face session, they could attend at another time. So maybe if they missed the July session, they could come in August, and so forth and so on. So, but for the most part, yes, our learners do kind of stick together in groups. But the beauty of doing the professional development is that everyone is welcome. So whether you trained this year or last year or in a previous year, you can come together and share information. So I hope that answers
Sure.
your question.
I think so. Barbara, anything to add on your perspective? Because you're kind of doing statewide training. So
Right. So, well, we do both. If we have enough participants in one particular county, they go through the training together. But we've also been going to this statewide model where any county that has people who need to be trained, we slot them into the statewide training.
okay. And then kind of once they start that process, they serve as kind of a group together.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. We have a couple more questions. So Wendy asks, and I think this is specifically for Helen, how long does a specific sharing session last?
I think that might be for Stephanie.
Okay, Stephanie?
Sorry.
Yes. So yes, I was the one who mentioned the sharing sessions.
Okay.
And that is a part of our professional development that's offered after the trainings are complete. And typically a sharing session lasts an hour. So it's only supposed to last an hour. However, in the one that we completed back in January, people had so many questions and they had so many comments, and this is what works for us, that we extended it. So it actually lasted closer to 2. But I would say just a short session, maybe like something like a lunch and learn, or just whenever you can schedule it, but try to make it as short as possible, because it's not another training session. So you don't want to extend it and prolong the time for that. But I think that if you typically schedule it for maybe an hour and maybe allow time afterward for questions and so forth, that would be sufficient. But ours is very experimental right now. We've only really actually done one this year. We just started this professional development portion of the training. So yeah, but you can make it as long or as short as you want. I really just kind of let the tutors, since this is really basically for them, I kind of let them guide, and I just facilitate and coach and sit back a moment and answer questions if they have them. But basically the sharing sessions are for them to share. So it's like they're teaching one another and supporting one another with what works, what doesn't work. If, they have a resource that they use that they really like. And also, it just kind of takes the pressure off of me as the trainer to have all of the answers. At this point, they can help one another. And so I think that's really the benefit of it. But they can be as long or as short as you like. But I recommend an hour. I think that would be sufficient.
Okay, good. So we've got a couple of more questions, and then I think we're going to wrap up. So there's been a few questions around people who would be interested in attending your training. I think specifically the ones that are, kind of all online, either through Zoom and the modules. Stephanie, I don't know that folks are going to attend your in person, but would you guys be open to people reaching out to you and seeing if they can schedule an opportunity to attend some or all of your tutor training sessions to kind of get a better sense of how it looks. And if you're okay with that, I'll leave it to, you guys have agreed to share your email addresses in the summary materials. So I'll just leave it to you guys to work out kind of what is doable between you and the workshop participants.
Sure, that's fine.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, so everybody's okay with that. So anybody that is interested in attending those, when you get the summary sheet and have their contact information, if you'll just reach out to them directly, that would be great. We have another question about kind of the charging for tutors. How does that work? If your tutors are all volunteers, are they willing to pay for training when they aren't getting paid to tutor? How much do you charge? Is there ever a problem? Does this ever kind of turn somebody off? If it does, do you offer scholarships? Do you find that it becomes a barrier sometimes?
We charge $45, and we try to explain that that is really for the training and the materials that the tutors receive. We do have a scholarship program if someone feels that they can't afford it. And once in a while we get somebody who says, well, I'm going to volunteer for you, so why should I pay you?
Mm-hmm.
Our fee is $40. It's an historical fee that existed, and but we do the same as Barb. We kind of explain that it's to cover staff time and the resources that we're providing and the access to different resources. But what we have found is that the volunteers who, and no one has come to me actually and refused to pay the fee, and we do not have a scholarship, but what we have found is that people who pay the fee tend to be more committed. And really we're kind of asking, it's not in stone, but we really would like about a year's commitment from someone for an hour or two a week. And we just find that it's one more thing that helps us determine people who are really truly interested in what we're doing, rather than just sort of signing up and then kind of changing their mind.
Okay, perfect. And then last question, and then I think we'll be done. Just a question about your training, Barbara. Does the New Jersey state government provide any funding or subsidization for your statewide trainings?
For our trainings, I mean, we do get funding from the State Department of Labor just to run our program. But I would say the money for our training probably comes from other donations and things.
So Literacy New Jersey gets some funding from the state to fund its organizational operations in general, but it's not specifically targeted towards the statewide training.
Correct.
Okay. All right. I think that has answered everybody's questions. Helen, Stephanie, Barbara, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with the folks here. All the folks we had attending, thank you very much for attending. Again, we'll send out a follow-up email in about a week with the recording and all the subsequent information. And just encourage you to have a great weekend. And thank you all for coming. Bye-bye.